F-Log 2 versus HLG. I went through and I did a whole bunch of testing so that you don't have to, and stay tuned so you can see which one you prefer and what you would rather shoot with. So I am filming everything on the FUJIFILM XS20. I'm shooting in 6K open gate for both the F-Log 2 and the HLG, and I'm shooting everything in 30 frames per second at the highest bit rate, 360 megabits per second. I'm shooting everything through a variable ND filter and adjusting my exposure in between the F-Log 2 and the HLG, which have slightly different base ISO levels. F-Log 2, everything is shot at 1250 ISO, which is the lowest you could go. HLG, everything is shot at 1000 ISO, which is the lowest you could go on that one. So instead of dropping the Fujifilm LUTs on to convert from log to Rec 709, what I did was I went into DaVinci Resolve and I did a color space transform. So this video isn't going to be a color grading video, but real quick, it's going to be a lot easier than trying to explain it. So let's jump into DaVinci Resolve and take a look. Alright, so first things first, we are in Resolve Studio 19 beta. So there's a few little glitches that I will explain when I get there. First thing we're going to do is go into our project settings and make sure that your color management is in the right spot. So color management, we're going to be in DaVinci YRGB, since we're going to be handling the color management on a node level rather than in the project setting level. So the timeline color space, we're going to be working in DaVinci Wide Gamut, and I'll explain how we get there here in a second. Output color space, I'm working on a Apple computer. I'm going to be watching it on a Apple Studio display, so Rec 709A is our selected output color space. First things first, our color space transform to get us from log into 709. A lot of people drop the LUT on that Fuji provides. I used to do that as well, and what I have been doing for a while now is the color space transform, and I really like that. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking the Rec 709 footage, and we are, which is what this looks like, and we're converting it into a even larger color space than what the log is already captured in, which is Rec 2020, and we're converting it into DaVinci Wide Gamut, which is the biggest working space that we could really manipulate our footage in. And that's a good thing, because a bigger color space means that we get more flexibility and more room to actually work and do what we want with that footage. So the very first step the very first thing that we're doing, and our very first node is our color space transform in. So it's just in the effects, color space transform under the Resolve FX color. And what we're doing is we are taking our camera capture space, we're transferring it into DaVinci wide gamut so we could do all of our adjustments, and then at the very end of the line we're doing a color space transform out to Rec 709, which is the final viewing color space. So our CST in, we're going to be working in both HLG and F Log 2. We're working in Rec 2020. For the F Log 2, the input gamma is F Log 2 obviously, and that's brand new in the beta version of Resolve. If you are still in Resolve 18, the workaround that I've been using until I got the public beta was the RE Log C3. You don't really see any difference when you're actually looking at the image. You will notice a slight little image on, or a slight little shift in the what you see on the waveform though. So that's the workaround if you're not in public beta or whatever, that works as well. So output color space and the output gamma, which is basically where all this is going to be living, is the DaVinci wide gamut and DaVinci intermediate. Alright, and then the CST out, and that's basically transferring DaVinci wide gamut, which is what we've been working in, into Rec 709. I've got Rec 709A selected because I'm working on the Apple. If you're not working on an Apple, most likely you could choose Gamma 2.2, and that will be correct. If you don't select the Rec 709A and you're working on an Apple, what you're going to see in this color grading window and what you see in the export are not going to look the same. And so make sure you have the 709A selected if you want what you see here to match the final product. So in the CST out, we are adding a couple extra steps. The CST in, we don't really need to do anything else here. Make sure your tone mapping is set to DaVinci, but we don't need to check any boxes. But in the CST out, the final node, we are going to have the custom max input selected, and we're going to go all the way up to 10,000 on that. And the custom max output is going to be 100. Typically, I would say the saturation compression should be selected, but what I found with this public beta, the DaVinci Resolve Studio public beta 19, if you have this selected, when you go to start playing, you get a color shift compared to what you see on the still image. So it's easier just to go none, so you don't need to mess with that. But the color shift is only when you're viewing it, it's not in the export. So if you could live with the color shift when you're working, have saturation compression selected. And we also have apply forward OOTF. This is only going to be selected in the CST out. Just make sure this is checked. The details don't really matter right now for the scope of this video, but apply forward OOTF will be selected for the CST out, not the CST in. Alright, so we've done the same exact color space transform on the HLG. The only difference is we are working in not FUJIFILM F Log 2, but we're working in HLG. So what I've selected is Rec 2020 because that is the same working space that we are getting from HLG, but we have Rec 2100 HLG scene selected for the input gamma. And scene refers to the capture footage rather than the display footage, which would be If you're going to be outputting HLG, you would not have the scene selected. You'd probably just go Rec 2100 HLG, but since this is what we captured, the capture space was HLG scene. So other than that, output color space and output gamma are the same as when we're working with the FLOG 2. And then the only adjustments that we've made on both the footages are exposure, which one of the benefits of always working in that DaVinci wide gamut is you know how things are going to react. And so what I always do is overexpose things just a little bit in camera, typically exposing for the sky if I'm shooting outside. FLOG 2 clips at 85%, so I set my zebras at 85, and for HLG that would clip at 100%, but I always set my zebras at 95%, just for that little tiny bit of flexibility. With that being said, I exposed the FLOG 2 and the HLG just till I got to that clipping point in the skies on both of them. And this is something I always do. Make sure that I have a cleaner image, is get everything as bright as possible in camera, not necessarily by boosting ISO, but just by if you have a bunch of natural light, if you stop down and you give it a whole bunch of ND and maybe go a little bit too far and you got to bring it back up, it's going to be noisy. But if it's overexposed to the point of you're not clipping any of your highlights, when you bring it down in post, you're going to clean up the image just a little bit, and you might actually get rid of any noise that was visible. So basically, when you're shooting at a brighter exposure level in camera, your noise floor gets higher, and when you bring it down in camera, you're kind of bringing everything down past that noise, all of your shadows down past that noise floor, which will make the image look even cleaner. So I always do this when I'm shooting, try to get things a little bit more, a little bit brighter than I actually want them, knowing that I'm going to be bringing down the exposure in post. Alright, so for a lot of the shots, the FLOG 2 did not need to be brought down as far as the HLG. A lot of the HLG shots, I was really lowering the exposure quite a bit. On this shot in particular, I actually had to lower the F-Log even more, and if you overexpose the F-Log by a little bit, you can recover pretty nice. So that is a big plus for shooting in the F-Log. I don't think the HLG is quite as forgiving if you overexpose. Alright, so I just lower the offset for pretty much all of my exposure adjustments. Then if I feel like I need just a little bit more push, maybe in my shadows, especially in the FLOG 2, which tends to keep the shadows just a little bit brighter, I'll just bring down the lift just a little bit. And I didn't really find myself having to do that very much on the HLG. The HLG shots have a little bit more contrast already, so it's not surprising that the FLOG 2, which has a little bit brighter shadows, dropping just those shadows alone to up that contrast to get a closer match to the HLG. Super easy, and it looks great. So the only other adjustment that I did on these clips was saturation. We just added a little bit of saturation, and I didn't just use the saturation knob. I actually transferred one of these nodes into a different color space. Sometimes it'll be HSV, sometimes I'll use HSL, but this is a different saturation method that you're kind of adjusting your color wheels within the shadows, gamma, and the gain, and it just kind of adds a little bit more of a natural saturation effect than the saturation knob. And That's typically how I add all my saturation. Like and subscribe if you want to see more on why use HSV, HSL, different saturation modes rather than just cranking that knob and calling it a day. Alright, so those were the only adjustments that I made on these shots up front, but some shots that you're going to see here in the future, if you watch till the end of this video, I added some contrast to the shots, and they're all labeled contrast added. And I feel like when you add contrast to the F Log, that really kind of makes it a little bit more of a possibility. It looks really good. I still prefer the HLG, the colors, and just kind of the way some of the colors act. But the F Log 2, when you crank when you crank the contrast, looks pretty nice. But yeah, all of these shots here in the back end, I still just try to get them as close as possible. But we did add some contrast just to kind of make things pop just a little bit more. Typically, I like contrast, I like saturation, so I would typically add contrast to most of my shots. Okay, so why 30 frames per second instead of 24 frames per second? I know a lot of people typically shoot in 24 frames. For me personally, I'm testing these picture profiles so I could find out which one works best for me in a professional workflow. So I make my money with my camera, with my Fujifilm cameras, and I need to know what's the best possible results I can get when using the Fujifilm cameras. And so this testing is based on what I'm going to use with my clients. So the video work that I do, I'm dealing with clients who are putting my stuff on social media, their website, YouTube. It's all internet stuff. I'm doing my first TV commercial next week. So 30 frames per second makes so much more sense because that is basically the frame rates that the social media stuff is going to prefer. That stuff's going to look a little bit better when viewing small little videos on websites because everybody's looking on their phones. Not everybody, a lot of people are looking on their phones. And so making sure that the stuff is going to look best where it's going to be viewed. And I'm making internet videos, so whether that's YouTube, social media, or website, all of that stuff just lives on the internet. So even TV commercials, I think most of the time are going to be 30 frames per second. So yes, 24 frames per second, more cinematic. If you're shooting a movie, if you're shooting a documentary even, yeah, maybe 24 frames per second might be the call. But for me personally, 30 frames per second makes the most sense, and shooting in this 6K open gate just allows me so much more freedom to deliver a wide video in case somebody wants to post the video on YouTube or their website or even Facebook. And of course, everybody knows that verticals are becoming more and more popular, and if you're posting this stuff to Instagram, which is where most of my clients live, if they're not on Facebook, they're on Instagram. So 6K open gate for me right now is the way to go, and 30 frames per second because of where my content is living. That's what I'm testing because that's what I'm going to be using. F-Log 2 versus HLG. What do you think? That's it. That's the video. Time for you to get out and go test it yourself. What I actually prefer, the HLG, I'm going to be putting that up against RAW. The Blackmagic RAW. I'm shooting through the Blackmagic Video Assist, and that's going to be the next video. So if you're interested in maybe branching out and shooting RAW on your Fuji camera, make sure you check that out. All right.